My spotlight today is on dyscalculia. This is an emerging area that you might be hearing more about than you've had heard in the past, and that's because it's a fairly recently discovered and thought about condition. It's got its fundamental aspects around number, so let's do some background thinking about number first of all. It's good to know that you're a maths genius, that before you were really able to do very much at all, you could count small collections, you could tell the difference between 2 and 3, you could do some simple additions and some simple subtractions. You'd have a bit of trouble, in fact you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between 19 and 20. You wouldn't be able to add bigger collections. But all of this could be done as a baby, and you might be wanting to know how people know how they find out what babies can do, and it's quite a fascinating thing to investigate how they did it. Basically what they did was put babies in capsules in front of a screen, and babies look at things when they find them interesting, and so they'd put up lots of things about number 2, lots of 2s of things, to taps, to blobs, to all sorts of different things. And after a time the babies got bored and they started looking away and looking at other things, and then they put up 3, and all of a sudden the babies are excited again, and that's how they would know that babies can tell the difference between 2 and 3. You can read more about that, and if you would like I can give you the references. So it's great to think that you're in this maths genius. However, don't get too ahead of yourself, don't get too excited, because we share that trait with quite a lot of other animals. Quite a lot of animals can tell the difference between 2 and 3, and 1, 2 and 3, can tell the difference between 2 and 20, but can't do the distinction between 19 and 20, for example. If we go to the concept of number, there are 3 aspects that are important. So we're born with a sense of quantity, and that's a sense of knowing how many of things there are. So a sense of 2-ness, a sense of 3-ness. Humans, though, are unique in that we don't stay there. We don't stay with this approximate sense of quantity. We, unlike other animals, develop language, and so we use the word as a way of encapsulating all that we know about quantity. So our understanding of quantity gets paired with this word, the word 2. We pair all our understandings of 2-ness onto that word, and that becomes, for us, our way of storing it in memory, that we can then use it. Humans also use symbols, and around the world there's quite a remarkable consistency in the symbols that are used for 1, 2 and 3, and they're around modified forms of a tally mark, and that is something that we also do quite uniquely. Now, many humans will do it so that they're born with the quantity. Around the time they get language, they will get the word and they peg that to there, and then they acquire the symbol. Some other learners, such as learners with Down syndrome, seem to need to have the symbol, because the symbol is something that allows them to hear the word when it's spoken and be able to connect it with the visual image of the symbol. But what we do know is that to have a good concept of number, we need these 3 aspects that come in together. So with dyscalculia, there is now a growing sense that there are some people, some without any other learning difficulty at all, who have a profound difficulty with number and a sense of quantity. And so this is a growing understanding through neuroscience and psychology, and certainly with the development of scanning technologies such as functional MRI, where we can scan the brain and see what is happening. Of course, it's not an easy science, and there's a lot to be thought about in it. But Dehaene, in his book The Number Sense: How the Mind Creates Mathematics, describes this as a selective deficit of the quantitative representation of numbers, the mental number line that gives meaning to Arabic numerals and number words. So one of the really powerful things for people who have a well-developed sense of number is that they have an intact mental number line. But the good news is that mathematics is more than number. Now, what some scientists believe is that there are parts of the brain that might be particularly tasked with the work of holding quantity and making sense of quantity. If that part of the brain is not working, it doesn't mean you can't do it. It's just that it means that you have to bring into the task some other areas of the brain that are less equipped to do that. As I said, it's an emerging field, and there's a lot of work still being done in the population to understand what is going on. But it's important, I think, at this point to make a note, word of caution. Dyscalculia is a very specific condition, and that there are many other reasons that people might have mathematics learning difficulties. It could be that they've got maths anxiety, so they find it that even though they could do it, it's a great fear for them, and they just can't bring themselves to do it without a lot of coaxing and support. It could be that they've had gaps in their learning. It could be that they come from an impoverished background, or they've experienced poor teaching, or any number of different things. So we want to be very careful not to just think any maths difficulty is called dyscalculia. It's a very, very specific condition related to our understanding of quantity. It's very important to avoid overdiagnosis. Now, it's not a teacher's role to do this in any case. This would require work with an educational psychologist to be able to determine. However, if we do suspect that a learner has lots of difficulties around quantity, we also want to avoid thinking that nothing can be done, because we can help. Let's have a look. The mental number line is a really important aspect of having a good sense of number, having number sense. And as Cockcroft said way back in '82, the committee looking into this area particularly around numeracy, they were talking about an at-homeness with number, feeling comfortable with a sense of number and where they are. So knowing where numbers are in relation to each other is a really foundational and important attribute of being numerate. I've worked with adults who have not had an intact number system. So they've not had a mental number line. I remember working with a student who had, she had a separate number line in her head for whole numbers. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she could see that one in her head. When she was asked to think about negative numbers, she had a different mental number line. Then when she was thinking about fractions, they appeared in a different place in her mind. And we worked over some time, and eventually she brought them all together. And she was so delighted that she wanted to show me where negative pi was on her number line. So it is something that we can teach. It is something that can take time, but what we certainly want to do is make sure that students have lots of visual representations of numbers, and that we show those number lines all the time, particularly for learners who might have difficulties. And one of the great advances that we all have at our fingertips are calculators. If a person has particular difficulty with quantity, and if it is to be found to be a neurological deficit, then making them try harder and not giving them any opportunity to go on to other mathematics until they can show that they can do simple addition, for example, is just cruel and unhelpful, because it's not allowing them to move on and do mathematics that they can be successful with. So you're never too young for your first calculator, and there's my daughter. One of the trade people at a maths teachers conference thought that she needed a calculator, and I thought, indeed she does. So there she is. And it was a great day sometime when she was about 5 or 6, when she realised that it was no longer just a toy or a pretend mobile phone. It actually calculated some answers for her, and she thought that was pretty brilliant. So what does the research say? Well, you're never too old either, so it's never too late to start, but you can always pick it up later on. And the research is that it's all learners, all levels, at all times, for appropriate use. Now that's an important caveat there, for appropriate use. It is so much more tedious to turn on your calculator to work out what 2 times 10 is than just to know it. And so learners will very quickly remember that as a pattern, as a known fact, if they're encouraged to do that. So one of the strategies that's really powerful to use is think before you calculate. So before you enter anything into the calculator, you would say, what is the answer likely to be? Now, it could be, if it's something simple like 2 times 10, oh, I know what that is, I don't even need to get my calculator out. There it is. But if it's something more complicated, I could be thinking about what the answer's likely to be. So if I don't know what 14 times 3 is, I can be thinking, yeah, but I know that it's not going to be 3 million. I know that it's not going to be negative 64. So if I get an answer that's way off, I will know that I've done something incorrect. But it can also be that it will help me to remember some of my strategies that will help me get a closer answer. So there are ways to help learners who have got to be over dependent on a calculator, but we also can avoid that if we do that straight from the start. Think before you calculate. If you do have a student who has particular aspects of not understanding quantity and having really difficult mathematics learning difficulties, if you don't allow them to use a calculator, it's like forbidding a short-sighted person from wearing glasses, and you just wouldn't do it. So a calculator can act as a prosthetic device. So what it does is allow somebody who cannot do that by other means, it will support them. So a prosthesis in medicine is used only for as long as it's needed, and you don't overuse it. So if you've been skiing and you break your leg and you sit in a wheelchair and you think, geez, this is pretty good, I'll stay here, eventually your muscles will atrophy and you won't be able to walk. So what we don't want to do is get kids over dependent, but it's the same thing that you can't then just, like the skier, you just can't whip the wheelchair away. You actually have to help them to move beyond that. So what you need to do is be able to support a learner to develop their other strategies. But if you do have a situation where a learner is really struggling with calculation, that's what a calculator is for, and then they can go on to do other mathematics. It's important to teach how to use it. Now, this is a table of data from a research study that I undertook with a colleague, Barbara Clark, at Monash University. And these are what the children were asked to do, is enter numbers on a calculator. And the age of these children, they had Down syndrome. One was 6 years and 2 months, and the oldest was 12 years and 3 months. If they were asked if they were not asked the question, it's coloured white. If they were asked the question and they got it right, it's green, and if they got it wrong, it's red. And so we can see that the young children, and this was part of a longer interview, so they were getting tired, so many of them we didn't ask them. But as the children were older, we can see that they could do enter 7. Now the lad, 11-year-old, he'd had enough, and he just wasn't playing the game, and it wasn't a very exciting game, so you can understand why not. So his results we can ignore, but we can see there's a trend that these kids knew how to enter 7, but when it came to 47, they started to have problems, and we can see that the eldest one, who's actually a really good counter, and he was very good at being able to say and recognise numbers, he just couldn't enter it in a calculator because he'd not been taught. He entered, and you can see he's entering 47 as 4407, and he does the same pattern when he had to do 724. He did 720 and 4. So he just needed to be taught how to enter the numbers, and he was away. Now this is an older student.
Whoa, this is the big one.
I love it.
12. This is a good one, hey? All right, this is what you know how to do.
Yep.
Can I ask you why you love it? Why do you love this?
But he was supported through the use of the
I
calculator
like
to
me,
do some very
my,
complex
medium.
year 12.
And why do you like them?
So here he is using his graphics calculator to do statistics.
use the calculator.
And his teacher had done a task
well, that's
analysis, and she had written out the steps that
Go.
he needed to do to be able to enter data and to use the calculator to find the results. So you can see there the different steps, the buttons that he had to press, and that she'd coloured them yellow to do mean, median and mode, and to do the histogram he'd use the greens, and then in the questions she colour-coded the questions so that he was easy to see which part of the calculator he needed. And these are very complicated beasts, really, these graphics calculators. So this is a list of steps that other kids in the class found helpful as well. So what was his view of all of this? Why do you love this? And why do you like them? So you can see he loved it, and so even though it's quite likely he, like other people with Down syndrome, has dyscalculia, it doesn't mean you can't do mathematics. You can use a calculator and go on to do really significant and useful work, so long as you have access to that prosthetic device. So if we do have a student with dyscalculia, what we can do is help all learners by reinforcing with the visual representation of number lines. It's important to recognise that maths is more than number, so if a student seems to have a block there, we need to give them the support of a calculator so that they can move around that block and get on and continue with mathematics. We also need to support learners explicitly by teaching them the tools of maths. So it might be a calculator, but could also be a spreadsheet, it could be apps, it can be other devices such as rulers and so on. But all of these things will help in building their mathematical skills that they can then use in the context of their life, which is numeracy. So dyscalculia is just one type of mathematics learning difficulty. It may have a neurological basis, but there are other types of maths learning difficulty as well. And so it's important to remember that there are ways to help, and it's our job to do so.